The carved wooden mask hanging from Ranger Station 7's bulletin board still had dirt under its fingernails, human fingernails, embedded in the wood like desperate prayers. Park Ranger Sarah Chen stared at the grotesque artifact, her coffee growing cold in hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the discovery 3 hours ago. The mask bore 6 crude symbols, each one corresponding to a missing person from the Whitmore camping incident 2 years prior. But there should have been 7 symbols. There were only 6. Someone had survived. August 15, 2023. The laughter echoing through Pineridge National Forest that summer evening belonged to 7 college friends, their voices carrying across the lake like ripples on still water. They'd chosen the most remote campsite available, Grid Section 47, a 4-mile hike from the nearest trail marker. Marcus Rodriguez shouldered his pack with practiced ease, his wilderness survival training from the Marines making him the group's unofficial leader. At 23, he'd seen enough darkness overseas to appreciate the simple beauty of American wilderness. The others looked to him for direction, unaware of the nightmares that still woke him most nights, or the pills he'd been taking to keep the flashbacks at bay. "This place gives me the creeps," whispered Lily Ashford, her art student's eye-catching details others missed, the way the trees seemed to lean inward, creating natural corridors that led nowhere. She'd been documenting everything with her vintage film camera, part of her senior thesis on liminal spaces in nature. Her photographs would later become crucial evidence, though she never lived to develop them. David Kim, the group's tech enthusiast, had reluctantly agreed to the digital detox camping trip. His phone had been buzzing incessantly with calls from his estranged father, a Silicon Valley executive who'd disowned him after David dropped out of law school to pursue game design. The forest's cellular dead zone felt like a blessing and a curse, no distractions, but no escape from the voices in his head that sounded increasingly like his father's disapproval. The other 4, Jessica, Tyler, Amanda, and Ben, were the supporting cast in what would become the most documented disappearance in Pacific Northwest history. Their individual stories mattered less than their collective fate, though each carried their own secrets into those woods. By morning, all 7 tents stood empty, their sleeping bags still warm. August 16, 2023, Day 1. The initial search and rescue operation lasted 3 weeks. Helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures while search dogs lost the scent at a stream crossing 2 miles from the campsite. The only evidence of struggle was a single tent with claw marks, though forensics couldn't determine if they came from the inside or outside. Detective Ray Morrison had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, but something about Pineridge nagged at him. The forest seemed to swallow evidence. Footprints led to nowhere. The teenagers' social media post stopped abruptly, their last updates eerily similar, "Can't wait to disconnect from everything." August 30, 2023, Day 15. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A hiker discovered David Kim's GoPro camera wedged between 2 rocks near Devil's Throat, a narrow canyon 3 miles from the campsite. The memory card contained 6 hours of footage, but the final hour made no sense. The video showed the 7 friends sitting around their campfire, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, too synchronized, like dancers following choreography they'd never learned. Their voices overlapped in impossible harmonies, speaking words in a language that predated human civilization. The last frame showed Marcus Rodriguez holding up a roughly carved wooden mask, his eyes reflecting firelight that seemed to come from within the wood itself. October 12, 2025, present-day Ranger Sarah Chen found the mask during routine maintenance of Fire Road 7, exactly where the old Pineridge Lookout Tower had stood before the Forest Service demolished it in 1987. The tower's foundation stones were arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with symbols that matched those on the mask. But the mask wasn't the only discovery. Buried beneath decades of pine needles and forest debris, Sarah uncovered a leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. The pages, written in multiple hands, told a story that made her question everything she thought she knew about the Whitmore disappearance. The journal began with Marcus Rodriguez's familiar handwriting. Day 1, we weren't supposed to find this place. The GPS coordinates David showed us don't exist on any official map. But we're here now, and something's watching us from the trees. Lily keeps taking pictures of empty spaces, but when she develops them, there are figures in the background, tall, thin shadows that weren't there when she clicked the shutter. Day 3, David's phone is working again, but it's only receiving calls from numbers that don't exist. They speak in whispers, giving us directions to follow the old logging road. We shouldn't go, but we can't seem to help ourselves. The handwriting changed, becoming more erratic. Day 7, they showed us the truth about the forest. About what lives in the spaces between the trees. The Pineridge Lookout Tower wasn't torn down, it was moved. Displaced. Hidden between moments, between breaths, between the spaces in our minds where fear grows. Day 12, we understand now. The forest doesn't take people. It transforms them. Makes them into something that can exist in the spaces where reality becomes flexible. 6 of us accepted the change. 1 refused. The final entry was written in a different hand entirely, shaky, desperate. Day 15, my name is Ben Crawford. I'm the only one left. The others, they're still here, but they're not them anymore. They wear faces that shift when you're not looking directly at them. They speak in voices that sound like whine through dead leaves. They want me to put on the mask, to join them in the space between the trees. I won't. I can't. I'm leaving this journal as proof, as warning. If you find this, don't look for us. Don't come to the coordinates David found. Some doors should never be opened. Sarah Chen's hands shook as she read the final pages. Ben Crawford's body had never been found. According to the journal, he'd escaped the forest, but the authorities had no record of anyone named Ben Crawford in the Whitmore camping group. The official list contained only 6 names. Someone had rewritten history. She flipped to the journal's back cover, where a 7th photograph was taped, a group shot of 7 friends around a campfire, their faces illuminated by flames that cast shadows in impossible directions. In the background, barely visible, stood the outline of a structure that looked like a fire lookout tower. The tower that had supposedly been demolished in 1987. Sarah checked her watch, 3:47 p.m. According to the journal, the transformations always began at sunset. She had 2 hours to reach the coordinates before dark, 2 hours to find answers to questions that had haunted the Forest Service for 2 years. She shouldn't go alone. She should call for backup, report the discovery, follow protocol. Instead, she found herself walking toward her ranger vehicle, the wooden mask tucked under her arm like a talisman. The coordinates in the journal were burned into her memory, 45.7749 degrees north, 121.8081 degrees west. A location that didn't exist on any official map. As she drove deeper into the forest, Sarah noticed the trees beginning to lean inward, creating natural corridors that seemed to lead nowhere. Her radio crackled with static that almost sounded like whispers. In her rearview mirror, she could swear she saw 7 figures walking single file down the road behind her, their faces hidden beneath masks carved from wood and shadow. She pressed harder on the accelerator, but the speedometer needle remained steady. The forest had its own rules about time and distance. The Pineridge Lookout Tower stood exactly where it had always stood, its wooden structure intact despite decades of supposed demolition. 6 figures sat around a campfire at its base, their faces turned toward the approaching vehicle. They wore masks carved from the same wood as the one in Sarah's passenger seat. As she parked and stepped out, the figures stood in perfect unison. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized, like dancers following choreography they'd never learned. Sarah, they spoke in harmony, their voices carrying across the clearing like wind through dead leaves. We've been waiting for you. She looked down at the mask in her hands. 7 symbols were carved into its surface, 6 for the transformed, and 1 for the witness who would bring the next group to the space between the trees. Her name was already carved into the wood, though she'd never told anyone she was coming. The radio in her truck crackled to life, dispatching units to respond to reports of missing hikers in grid section 47. 7 college students had failed to return from a camping trip. Their last known location was near the old Pineridge Lookout Tower, the tower that had been demolished in 1987. Sarah Chen smiled and placed the mask over her face. The wood was warm against her skin, and for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. In the distance, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. 7 park rangers were coming to investigate the disappearances, their radios crackling with coordinates that didn't exist on any official map. The forest was patient. It had all the time in the world. And somewhere in the space between the trees, Ben Crawford continued to run, his footsteps echoing through dimensions that existed only in the moments between heartbeats, still trying to warn people about doors that should never be opened. His voice carried on the wind, a whisper that reached no one, don't look for us. Don't come to the coordinates. Some doors should never be opened. But the forest had learned to mimic human voices perfectly, and every warning sounded like an invitation to those who knew how to listen.